I've been a fan of the Assassin's Creed franchise ever since the beginning. When I played the first installment back in, what was it? 2007? That's 13 years ago, what the f***? The whole Assassins vs Templar thing, the Animus, genetic memories, all that was my jam back then. The series went through lots of changes over the years, and for most of it I was along for the ride. But the biggest changes came in 2017 with Assassin's Creed Origins, a game that took the AC formula and made it an RPG. At first I had my doubts, but I ended up loving it and played around 70 hours of it. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was more of the same, but with less assassins and even more RPG stuff. Now at that point, I started to get scared of where the franchise was going. Now we have Valhalla, Ubisoft's attempt at putting Assassin's Creed into the world of Vikings, and well, it's quite the disappointment. In fact, I'd say it's my least favorite entry in the series so far. Now take a deep breath and let's see what the game has to offer. Even if we disagree, let's try to have a civil discussion in the comments below, but please watch till the very end before making up your mind. I also want to point out that I played the game on the base PS4, which is, much like Watch Dogs Legion, the worst way to experience the game, so my opinion on it might have been slightly altered by the technical issues. My name is Michael, welcome to From the Attic, and this is my review of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. You play as Eivor, a Viking part of the Raven clan who grew up in the majestic beauty and harsh reality of Norway. Yet, you must leave it and build a new home in England following some brewing conflicts. You're tasked with building a settlement for your clan, forging alliances, and conquering the land you want to call yours. The main story of Valhalla is by far my favorite part of the game. As someone who loved the narrative of Witcher 3, diving into the politics, intrigues, and courtships of the Viking expansion across Europe was a blast. Nothing is black and white here. Characters are surprisingly fleshed out, and witnessing the different types of personalities clashing over uncharted territories and hostile lands is great. The game also tackles themes of mythology and folklore in ways that I didn't expect and cleverly work themselves in the game's lore. Of course, as with any Assassin's Creed game, there's also a present-day storyline. I'm one of those people who love that part of the franchise, but who stopped caring after AC3. And things are no different here. Not gonna say much about it, other than it's not very good, and I didn't care for 1 second about what was going on, sorry. As good as the main story is, it's sadly told through some very poor facial animations and generally awkward movements. The character models themselves are usually fine, all the main characters have pretty cool and unique designs, but sometimes you stumble on some pretty disturbing anomalies that will haunt your dreams. Contributing to both its story and its gameplay, the game introduces a settlement mechanic. This is where all the narrative arcs start, more precisely around the War Table, this map of England showing the different conquest opportunities. This is a place that you can build, upgrade with resources, and gear up before your next venture. The general idea is that you must expand your influence by creating allies and destroying your common enemies. Each region has its leaders and demands to be approached differently in order to be conquered. Depending on the political state of the territory, negotiations will either lead to discussion or war. Throughout the adventure, you'll be offered numerous choices that will have an impact on how the story unfolds. Sparing or killing someone can have a genuine effect on the various relationships you build as you meet and form bonds with people. This is pretty good. Even if the settlement is kind of a pseudo feature filled with stuff that end up being kind of useless, it serves its narrative purpose quite well by giving the player some type of home base, and going to new regions and forging alliances doesn't get old thanks to the very good writing. Of course, before making any kind of agreement with anyone, you must travel to where they are, which brings me to exploration. This has always been my favorite part of the series, and unfortunately I did not enjoy it nearly as much as I usually do. The physical act of exploring the world is fairly enjoyable, and the environments you get to see can look quite spectacular. If the characters are ugly, the landscapes are gorgeous, but at the same time, England is far from looking as impressive and appealing as ancient Egypt or Greece. Villages, towns, and cities are also few and far between, meaning you spend most of your time in forests and grassy plains. Honestly, seeing how beautiful Norway is at the beginning of the game, I kinda wish it stayed there, to be honest. Ubisoft also introduced a lot of changes to the formula, especially when it comes to exploration and quests. And again, I'm not a big fan of those changes. Gone are the days of quest givers and fully fledged side missions. The developers obviously wanted to make their world feel more seamless by getting rid of quest markers and ditching the question marks. Instead, you find these little dots scattered everywhere. Your map is filled with yellow, blue, and white icons indicating 3 possible types of collectibles: wealth, mysteries, and artifacts. Mysteries being the closest thing to side quests. Although if the main story is engaging, the same cannot be said about the secondary storylines and all the side content you find during your exploration of England. Mysteries never reach the quality of the side quests of the previous games and instead appear like a collection of random events, puzzles, and boss fights that are not particularly interesting to play, in my opinion. Remember the frying pan quest in Witcher 3? Well, this is exactly how the majority of the side stories felt like to me, except for a couple of compelling world events, underground caves, and things like that. Something I also noticed is that Ubisoft willingly removed information to encourage exploration and to reward curiosity, but weirdly enough it had the exact opposite effect for me. No more outposts on the map, leading to instances where you get spotted out of nowhere without even knowing you were in someone else's camp. Your raven, which used to be an eagle, is now kind of useless since he can't mark enemies anymore. There are also lots of treasures hidden behind closed doors, but the game does a very bad job explaining what you can and can't do. So a lot of times I ended up running around a house or a temple searching for a key or for a way in, wondering if I'm doing something wrong or if I needed to wait for something specific. Let's be clear, I have absolutely no issues with games that make the player think. Hell, I platinumed The Witness and love puzzle games. And the past AC games did have a tendency to hold the player by the hand a little bit too much. But here, even though I appreciate the developer's intentions, I just feel like the game handles it pretty awkwardly and sometimes too cryptically. For instance, I wanted to grab some gear that was inside that abandoned Roman temple, but I couldn't find a way in, only to realize that I needed to climb that tree and shoot the lock in between that crack in the wall. Problem is, this is the first time a puzzle like this appears in the game, and it does so without any proper introduction to this type of mechanic. I had to read the game's tips to see that shooting the planks blocking a door through a window was a common thing, and this happens a lot of times. Those might seem like details to you, but they did prevent me from ever feeling a true sense of accomplishment and immersion. The game cultivates the feeling of randomly stumbling on things, and for some that might be a positive, but for me it made the world feel clustered and messy at the same time. So the exploration, even though it can be fun at times, especially on a horseback or aboard your personal Viking longboat, ends up being pretty confusing and not rewarding enough to encourage the player to go off the beaten path. At least that was the case for me. Take a game like Origins. Even if it also had basic treasures, generic collectibles, and things like that, the feeling of progression was much greater in that game simply because of the amount of information that was given to the player. It's also important to notice that almost everything was rewarded with some type of loot that you could try instantly, and the side stuff was usually more engaging than what we see in Valhalla. Most of the time after reaching one of these color markers, especially the so-called mysteries, I ended up asking myself, so why did I come here exactly? A game like The Witcher 3, for example, almost never have those moments because you are always rewarded with something, whether it's a good, well-crafted side story, actual loot, or fun optional tasks like monster nests and bandit camps. But even when exploration is at its best, it is unfortunately interrupted by combat. And I say unfortunately because it pains me to say it, but the combat in this game is quite terrible. I'm really sorry to say this, but I gotta be honest here. Now, I did play the game on base PS4 and the frame rate can get awful during combat sequences, so I'm sure on next gen at 60 FPS things get slightly better, but still, a good frame rate cannot entirely salvage this. On paper, there's a lot of good stuff. The game takes fully advantage of its RPG foundations by providing lots of weapon choices, customizations, and upgrades. The skill tree is fairly well made and offers you plenty of passive and active skills for you to choose what fits your playstyle. Its design is also clean and easy to read. Additionally, you have special abilities that you can unlock by finding books of knowledge in the game world. You can find both melee and ranged abilities that will allow you to take the upper hand in certain situations and deal with large amounts of enemies with greater ease. The game also has dual wielding, meaning you can have a warhammer in one hand and an axe in the other, or you could even have two shields if you want. This all sounds great, right? Well, sadly, the combat has to be one of the messiest I've seen in a very long time. Aside from the special abilities and the finishing moves that can look pretty badass, the combat always ends up looking like a chaotic mess. The animations look sloppy, careless, and just not convincing in the slightest, with characters almost floating around the battlefield as they dodge, dash, and spin around each other. The poor sense of weapon impact, the lack of weight, the flat sound design, and the utterly confusing camera make the various combat encounters feel like chores that you must go through in order to continue on with the rest of the game. The AI is also shockingly bad, with enemies running in circles like chickens with their heads cut off. And that is especially the case when you have large-scale battles like the various raids or attacks on fortresses. Say what you want about the old style of combat in the Assassin's Creed series, but I would take that any day of the week over this new system that was introduced in Origins and that was pushed to its unfortunate limits in Valhalla. Yes, it was a tiny bit easier, but it looks so much more fluid, intense, epic, and, well, fun. In my opinion, there's just no competition here. The other thing missing is the stealth. Yes, it is in the game, but it's rarely a viable option. The level design usually seems to discourage stealth in favor of combat. Plus, Eivor's clunky movements oftentimes prevent stealth sequences from playing out like you initially intended. They did bring back social stealth to some degree by adding this cloak that makes the enemies less aware of your presence, but that's about it. Since you spend very little time in cities, it ends up being a forgettable feature. And even when the stealth works, it never manages to surpass the likes of Unity and Syndicate. I understand that Vikings were not the most stealthy warriors, but this is Assassin's Creed, so it should be at the center of its design. So if you add the pretty disappointing animations to the generally lackluster combat and sprinkle all the glitches, bugs, and issues on top, you get a game that looks severely unpolished and that pales in comparison to other Ubisoft games of the past. Just compare it to Assassin's Creed Unity or even Watch Dogs, two games that came out in 2014. I know both of these also had lots of bugs when they released it, but they still showcase a level of polish that is lacking here, especially in the phenomenal quality of animations. Playing Valhalla really made me realize the importance of good animations, because even when a game looks gorgeous, when this element isn't nailed down, the experience fails to immerse the players in whatever the developers wanted to achieve. Ubisoft clearly wanted to make you feel like a Viking, and sadly the fantasy never comes to life because of the poor animations and all the other related issues. What saddens me the most is that Ubisoft already did an incredible Viking game 4 years ago, and that is For Honor. The immersion in that game was so much better. The animations were incredible, the characters had weight, and the weapons had true and solid impact. Ubisoft used to have some of the best animations in the business, in my opinion. Of course, the technology in Valhalla is superior with better textures, lighting, and things like that. Even though I still think Unity looks better, but those past games had an attention to detail that you just cannot find here. Assassin's Creed Valhalla could have been great, but this might be the nail in the coffin for me. If they want to keep that franchise alive, they really have to streamline their design, go back to simpler times, and polish the hell out of what works and burn what doesn't. Honestly, Ubisoft has to step their game up when it comes to animations, details, sound, and so on. Because right now they are way behind the competition when you look at other open world games like Ghost of Tsushima, Red Dead Redemption 2, or Horizon Zero Dawn, a game that came out in 2017. I want to see them succeed because I love their various IPs, but with next gen around the corner, I can't help but feel like they're not ready for it. They need to take their time with their games. I understand there's financial pressure, but if they simply made games that reflected the size of their company, people would show up and buy their products in even greater number. Thank you guys for watching my review of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This is my first time doing such a negative video and I absolutely hate it. I want to thank Ubisoft for sending me a review code, it truly means a lot, and I sincerely hope that my review won't destroy our relationship forever. Like I said, I've been a fan of the company for years now, I wanted to love the game, I would have been the first one to scream it from the rooftops, but I just had to be honest. So if you appreciate honesty, please subscribe to the channel for more. You can also become a part of the From the Attic family by joining the Discord server. The link is in the description below. That's pretty much it, and I'll see you guys very soon with some next gen coverage. See ya.